The morning sun had barely touched the weathered boards of the church when Evelyn Hart slipped through the back door, her worn boots silent against the dusty floor. The white dress, her mother's wedding gown, yellowed with age, hung heavy on her frame. Each step weighted with dread rather than joy. Through the thin walls, she could hear the gathering crowd, their voices a low murmur of expectation and gossip. At 34, widowed for 3 years, she knew what they whispered. Too old, too worn, lucky to have any man willing to take her. The words had carved themselves into her heart like brands on cattle hide, each one burning deeper than the last. She pressed her back against the door, breathing hard. Through the single window, she could see Barnaby Keller's black carriage waiting like a hearse. The man himself stood at the altar, checking his pocket watch with the same cold efficiency he used when collecting debts or foreclosing on farms. He'd never asked for her hand, merely informed the town council that he'd be taking Samuel Hart's widow as payment for outstanding loans. A practical arrangement, the mayor had said. A woman needs protection. Protection. Evelyn's fingers found the bruise on her wrist where Barnaby had gripped her at their last meeting, his breath hot with whiskey as he detailed exactly what kind of wife she would be. Obedient, silent, grateful. The organ wheezed to life in the sanctuary, playing a funeral dirge dressed up as a wedding march. Soon they'd notice her absence. Soon Barnaby would send his men to fetch her like a stray horse. Evelyn looked down at the dress, at her rough hands emerging from the delicate lace. These hands had birthed calves, mended fences, held her dying husband through his final fever. They weren't meant for whatever Barnaby had planned. A laugh escaped her, bitter, sharp, at the thought of love. Love was for young women with smooth faces and empty hearts, not weathered widows with too many ghosts. "I'm too old for love," she whispered to the empty room. The words tasted like ash. Through the window, she saw Barnaby's men beginning to shift restlessly. Big Tom Wheeler loosened his gun belt. Jack Slade spat tobacco juice into the dust. They'd come for her soon, and the whole town would watch as they dragged her to the altar. A lesson in what happened to women who forgot their place. The back door opened onto the tree line, thick pines that marked the edge of civilization. Beyond lay the mountains, wild and unforgiving. A death sentence for a woman alone, they said. But as Evelyn heard footsteps approaching the vestry door, death seemed preferable to the life waiting at that altar. She gathered the ridiculous dress in her fists and ran. The forest swallowed her whole, branches catching at the white fabric like grasping fingers. Behind her, shouts erupted from the church, angry, disbelieving. A woman didn't run from Barnaby Keller. A widow didn't refuse charity. The very order of their world demanded her surrender. Evelyn stumbled over roots, her Sunday shoes useless on the rough ground. The dress tore, leaving white flags on thorns and branches, a trail any fool could follow. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The alternative waited behind her with cold eyes and harder hands. The trees grew denser, older, their trunks thick as wagon wheels. Sunlight filtered through in dusty columns, and the air smelled of pine sap and ancient earth. This was beyond where the townspeople ventured, beyond where decent folk belonged, mountain man territory, where civilization's rules held no sway. Her foot caught in a root, sending her sprawling into the moss. The dress ripped from neckline to waist, exposing her plain shift underneath. She lay there gasping, listening for pursuit, but heard only the whisper of wind through branches and the distant call of a hawk. Slowly, Evelyn pushed herself up. Her hands were scraped raw, blood seeping through the white gloves. The wedding dress hung in tatters, more shroud than gown now. She almost laughed at the sight. Barnaby's pristine bride transformed into something wild, something that belonged more to these woods than his parlor. The shouts were growing closer. Dogs now. He'd brought dogs. Of course he had. Barnaby Keller didn't let debts go uncollected, whether in coin or flesh. Evelyn forced herself to her feet, shaking off the ruined dress like a snake shedding skin. In her shift and petticoats, she could move faster, think clearer. The mountain rose before her, its peaks lost in clouds. Somewhere up there, men lived outside the law, outside the reach of civilization's cruel arithmetic that reduced women to property and debt. As she climbed, using rocks and roots for handholds, Evelyn felt something stir in her chest. Not hope, she was too old for hope, but a fierce, burning refusal. She would not stand at that altar, would not speak vows that meant surrender, would not become another ghost in Barnaby Keller's house, joining the whispers about his first wife who died so conveniently young. The dogs were closer now, their baying echoing off the canyon walls. But Evelyn Hart, widow, debtor, woman too old for love, kept climbing. Each step took her further from the life they'd planned for her, deeper into a wilderness that asked nothing of her but the strength to survive. Behind her, the white tatters of her mother's wedding dress fluttered like surrender flags she'd refused to wave. And ahead, the mountain waited, silent and vast, keeping its secrets close. She'd made her choice. Now she'd live with it or die with it. Either seemed better than the alternative. The sun climbed higher, indifferent to the drama below, and somewhere in those ancient peaks, unknown to Evelyn, a man sat by a cold fire, turning a worn piece of carved wood in his hands, waiting for something he couldn't name but would recognize when he saw it. The mountain stream ran cold against Evelyn's torn feet as she stumbled through the shallows, trying to lose the scent for the dogs. Her shift clung wet and heavy, and her teeth chattered despite the noon sun filtering through the canopy. She'd been running for hours now, the sounds of pursuit fading and returning like a tide she couldn't escape, when she finally collapsed on a moss-covered boulder. Her body refused to move another step. The forest pressed close around her, ancient and indifferent. This was where she would die. Then, not in childbirth or fever like a proper woman, but alone in the wilderness, fleeing a fate worse than death. "You're bleeding." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, deep as thunder in the distance. Evelyn's head snapped up, her heart hammering against her ribs. A man stood between the trees, so still she'd taken him for part of the forest itself, buckskin and fur, a rifle casual in one hand, dark hair falling past his shoulders, everything the townspeople warned about when they spoke of mountain men. But it was his eyes that held her, gray as winter sky, steady as stone, looking at her like she was something more than a runaway bride or unpaid debt. "The dogs!" she gasped, struggling to stand. "They're about a mile back, casting around where you crossed at the beaver dam." He moved closer, each step deliberate but unthreatening. "You did good throwing them off. Not many townfolk know that trick. I'm not townfolk." The words came fierce, surprising her. Not anymore. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. He set his rifle against a tree and shrugged out of his coat, holding it toward her. "You're going to catch your death in those wet things." Evelyn stared at the offered coat, then at him. "Why would you—" "Because I know who you are, Evelyn Hart." The sound of her name on his lips sent ice through her veins. Had Barnaby sent him? Was this another trap? She backed away, bare feet slipping on wet stone. "Easy now." He set the coat on a rock between them and stepped back, hands visible and empty. "I mean no harm. Been watching that town for years, watching how they grind people down. Saw you at your husband's funeral. Saw how they started circling before the dirt had settled on his grave. You watched me?" A flush crept up his weathered neck. "Not like that. I trade in town sometimes. Fix things for the widow Clearwater. She talks about you, how you kept that farm running alone, how you never asked for charity even when the bank started closing in." He paused, then added quietly, "How Barnaby Keller decided you'd make fine payment for your husband's debts." The dog's baying grew closer. Evelyn grabbed the coat, too cold and scared to care about propriety. It smelled of wood smoke and pine, falling past her knees like armor. "They'll find me," she said. "He won't stop. Let me worry about that." The man picked up his rifle with practiced ease. "Name's Ransom Mercer. Folk call me Ran. I don't need—" "You need to see something." He reached into his shirt and pulled out something on a leather cord. Her breath caught. It was a piece of carved wood, worn smooth with handling. A tiny horse, perfect in every detail. Samuel made that. She whispered, "He carved it but I buried it with him." "No." Rand's voice was gentle now. "He gave it to me 6 months before he died. Said if anything happened to him, I was to watch out for you. Said you were too proud to accept help but too good to let Keller have." The world tilted. "Samuel knew you?" "Saved my life once, years back. Found me half dead after a grizzly got hold of me. Nursed me through the fever. We kept in touch after. Not many knew. He was worried what folks would think. His wife knowing a mountain man." Rand tucked the carving away. "Last time I saw him, he was already sick. Made me promise." "Promise what?" "To make sure you had a choice." The dogs burst from the underbrush in a fury of teeth and noise. Rand moved fast as lightning, putting himself between Evelyn and the pack. His rifle cracked once, sending dirt flying at the lead dog's feet. They skidded to a halt, confused without their handlers. "Get behind that big pine," Rand ordered. "Now!" Evelyn scrambled for cover as voices shouted through the trees. Big Tom Wheeler emerged first, pistol drawn. Jack Slade close behind with 2 more of Barnaby's men. "Well, well." Wheeler's grin showed too many teeth. "Ransom, Mercer. Should have known we'd find you sniffing around another man's woman." "She's no man's woman," Rand said evenly. "She's her own. Not according to the law. Not according to the debts she owes." Wheeler gestured with his gun. "Stand aside, mountain man. This isn't your business. Samuel Hart made it my business. Hart's dead." Slade spat tobacco juice near Rand's boots. "Dead men don't get a say." "This one does." The standoff stretched tight as a bowstring. Evelyn pressed against the rough bark, Rand's coat heavy around her shoulders. Through a gap in the branches, she could see more men approaching. Barnaby himself, dressed for a wedding-turned manhunt, his face dark with rage. "Mrs. Hart." His voice carried like a whip crack. "You've caused considerable embarrassment. Return now, and we'll forget this foolishness." "Like you forgot your first wife." The words flew from Evelyn's mouth before wisdom could stop them. "The whole town knows she died afraid." Barnaby's face went white, then red. "Careful, woman. Grief can make people say things they regret. The only thing I regret is not running sooner." "You hear that, boys?" Wheeler laughed. "The widow's got spirit. Boss is going to enjoy breaking that." Rand's rifle shifted slightly. "Any man lays a hand on her answers to me. You're outnumbered 5 to 1. Mercer. Been worse odds." Barnaby stepped forward, his wedding clothes incongruous in the wild setting. "This is absurd. Mrs. Hart, you have obligations. Your husband's debts are not hers to pay." Rand interrupted. "No law makes a widow responsible for her husband's loans. You're trading on fear and custom. Keller, not legal right. Law is what men like me say it is." Barnaby's hand moved to his coat. "Now stand aside before—" The shot came from the trees, splintering bark inches from Barnaby's head. Another mountain man materialized from the forest. Then another. Weather-beaten faces, steady rifles, men who'd chosen these mountains over civilization's chains. "Heard there was a wedding," one drawled. "Seems the bride has other plans." Wheeler and the others shifted nervously. "In town, they were dangerous. Here, they were prey." Barnaby's face twisted with fury, but he wasn't stupid. "This isn't over." "No," Rand agreed. "But today it is. Take your men and go. The lady's made her choice." For a long moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Barnaby turned on his heel. "Move out. We'll settle this properly. In town. With the law." They melted back into the forest, the dogs following reluctantly. Only when the sound of their passage faded did Evelyn emerge from behind the tree. The other mountain men nodded to her respectfully before vanishing as quietly as they'd come. She stood alone with Rand, wearing his coat, shaking with cold and delayed terror. "I've been waiting for you," he said softly, and she understood he meant more than just today. Samuel's promise, the carved horse, Years of watching from afar as she struggled alone. "I'm too old for this," she whispered. "Too old for running, for starting over, for what?" The word love stuck in her throat like a stone. Instead, she looked at this man who'd put himself between her and danger, who carried her dead husband's last wish around his neck. "What happens now?" Ran smiled, and it transformed his face from dangerous to kind. Now you decide where you want to go. My cabin's up the mountain. It's rough, but it's warm and safe. Or I can take you over the pass to the next county, put you on a stage heading anywhere you want. You're giving me a choice. That's what Samuel wanted, what you deserve." He paused, then added, "I've been waiting. Yes, but waiting for you to choose, not to take what wasn't offered." Evelyn pulled his coat tighter around herself. Behind her lay the town, with its debts and obligations and men who saw her as property. Ahead rose the mountain, wild and uncertain but honest in its dangers. "Show me your cabin," she said at last. I need time to think." Rand's smile widened slightly. "Time you'll have, much as you need." As they climbed higher into the mountains, Evelyn felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not hope. She was still too cautious for that, but possibility. The weight of being too old began to lift with each step away from civilization's cruel arithmetic. Behind them, the forest closed over their passage like water, keeping its secrets. And if Ran walked a little closer than necessary, if his hand steadied her more gently than required, well, that was a secret the mountains could keep too. 3 days had passed in the mountain cabin. 3 days of peace Evelyn had forgotten existed. Ran's home was simple but sturdy, built with his own hands from logs that still smelled of resin. She'd insisted on earning her keep, mending his worn clothes and helping prepare meals from his smokehouse stores. They moved around each other carefully, like dancers learning new steps, speaking of everything except what hung between them. On the 3rd evening, as she sat by the fire patching a tear in his winter coat, the door burst open. Ran entered fast, rifle in hand, face grim. "They're coming. Whole town looks like—" Evelyn's needle stilled. Through the open door, she could hear them, horses, voices, the angry buzz of a mob working itself toward violence. Her brief paradise crumbled like ash. "I'll go," she said, standing. "This isn't your fight. You'll stay." His voice brooked no argument. "And it became my fight the moment Samuel asked me to watch over you." Through the window, torches appeared between the trees like fallen stars. Barnaby Keller rode at the head of the mob, but it was the faces behind him that made Evelyn's heart sink. Mayor Aldrich, Sheriff Watson, even Mrs. Pemberton from the general store, her face twisted with righteous anger. The whole town had come to drag her back. "Mercer," Barnaby's voice carried clear in the mountain air. "Send out Mrs. Hart. This doesn't concern you." Rand stepped onto the porch, rifle casual across his arm. Evelyn followed despite his gesture to stay back. If they wanted her, they'd have to look her in the eye while they took her. The crowd spread out before the cabin, torches casting dancing shadows that made their faces demonic. She recognized most of them, people she'd traded with, sat beside in church, helped during harvest. Now they looked at her like she was something diseased. "Mrs. Hart." Mayor Aldrich tried for a reasonable tone. "You've caused Mr. Keller considerable embarrassment. The whole county's talking. Return now, honor your obligations, and all is forgiven." What obligations? Evelyn surprised herself by stepping forward. "To marry a man I don't love? To pay debts I didn't incur? To know your place?" "Mrs." Pemberton shrilled. "A decent woman would be grateful at your age. Who else would have you?" The words hit like stones. Even here, even now, she was too old, too worn, too far past her prime to deserve choice. "I would." Rand's simple declaration silenced the crowd. He moved beside her, solid as the mountains themselves. "If she'd have me." Barnaby's laugh was ugly. "The widow and the wild man. How fitting. Tell me, Mercer, What's she paying you with? She has nothing left but debt. She owes me nothing. She owes me. Barnaby's civilized mask cracked. $3,000 her worthless husband borrowed, plus interest, plus the embarrassment of leaving me at the altar. The law? Your law. Someone interrupted. The crowd parted as old Pete, the town blacksmith, stepped forward. Not all of us agreed to this, Keller. Making a woman pay for her husband's debts with her freedom sits wrong. Sits wrong? Mrs. Pemberton turned on him. What sits wrong is a woman of her age running off like some love-struck girl. It's indecent, unnatural. What's unnatural? Another voice called out. Young Tom Bradley, the minister's son, is forcing anyone to marry against their will. The crowd began to fracture, arguments breaking out. Some stood firm behind Barnaby. Others shifted uneasily. The torchlight flickered across faces torn between old beliefs and uncomfortable truths. Enough! Barnaby dismounted, hand on his pistol. Sheriff Watson, do your duty. Arrest this woman for theft. Theft! Evelyn's voice rose. What have I stolen? Yourself. Barnaby's smile was cold. Your collateral on your husband's loan. By running. You've stolen from me. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. Now, Barnaby, I'm not sure that's exactly. Do your job, or I'll find someone who will. Barnaby turned to the crowd. You all know me. I've kept this town running, provided jobs, extended credit when times were hard. This woman spits on all that. She makes fools of us all, running to the mountains, taking up with savages. Savage? Rand's voice dropped dangerous low. Because I choose these mountains over your town? Because I won't bow and scrape for your approval? Because you're interfering with lawful business. Nothing lawful about it. Pete insisted. Show us the papers. Keller, show us where it says a widow becomes property. Barnaby pulled out a sheaf of documents, signed by her husband. Everything he owned is collateral. A man can't sign away what isn't his, Rand said, and she was never his to bargain. The philosophical point was lost on many, but it struck home with some. Young Bradley nodded. A few women in the crowd exchanged glances, perhaps thinking of their own futures. I'm done talking. Barnaby gestured to his men. Take her. Wheeler and Slade started forward, but Rand's rifle swung up. First man to touch her loses the hand. You can't fight us all, Mercer. Don't have to, just have to make it cost more than she's worth to you. The standoff stretched taut. Then Evelyn did something that shocked everyone, including herself. She laughed. Not hysteria, but genuine, bitter amusement. Look at us, she said to the crowd. All this for a woman too old for love. That's what you all say, isn't it? Too old, too used, too worthless for anything but cooking and cleaning and warming a bed she doesn't want to share. She pulled off Rand's coat, standing in her simple dress, letting them see her as she was, worn, weathered, unbowed. I am 34 years old. I've buried a husband, lost a child in birth, worked to land until my hands bled. And yes, I'm too old to pretend gratitude for chains, too old to smile while you sell me like cattle, too old to care what you think of my choices. Shameless, someone muttered, but others looked away, discomforted. Is it shameless to want choice? To refuse to be payment for another's debt? She looked directly at the women in the crowd. How many of you married for love? How many for obligation? And how many wish in your secret hearts that you'd had the courage to run? That's enough. Barnaby drew his pistol. Sheriff, if you won't do your duty. The shot that rang out came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Clearwater, the elderly widow Rand had mentioned, stood at the edge of the crowd with an ancient shotgun. That's my warning shot. Barnaby Keller, next one won't be. Martha, what are you? Settling an old debt. The old woman's eyes were fierce. Your father destroyed my sister 40 years ago. Same game, loans, debts, forced marriage. She died within the year, and everyone knew why, but nobody said nothing. Well, I'm saying it now. The revelation sent ripples through the crowd. Barnaby's face flushed dark. That has nothing to do with, has everything to do with it. Martha kept the shotgun steady. Evil runs in families. Seems like, but not tonight, not this woman. One by one, others began to speak. Stories whispered in kitchens, bruises hidden under Sunday clothes, young women married off to pay family debts. The town's ugly secrets spilled out like blood in the torchlight. "This is madness," Barnaby snarled. "You're all mad. She's just a woman." "Exactly." Evelyn stepped forward, no longer afraid. "Just a woman. Too old for love, too worn for worth, too far past my bloom to matter. So why all this fuss? Why bring the whole town to drag back something so worthless?" "Because you're mine." The words tore from Barnaby's throat, revealing the truth beneath his civilized veneer. "I decided. I chose. You don't get to say no." The naked ugliness of it hung in the air. Even some of his supporters stepped back. "But I do say no." Evelyn's voice rang clear. "I say no to your choice, your claim, your twisted law. I choose him," she gestured to Ran. "Or I choose no one, but I choose me, not you." "Then you choose death." Barnaby raised his pistol toward her. 3 things happened at once. Ran moved to shield her. Martha's shotgun swung toward Barnaby, and Pete stepped between them all, his blacksmith's bulk blocking the shot. "Enough blood," Pete said firmly. "This ends now. Keller, you've shown us who you are. The whole town's seen it. You can shoot us all or you can leave, but Mrs. Hart stays free." The crowd began to shift, reforming around Pete, Martha, young Bradley. Not all, but enough. Enough to make the cost too high. Barnaby's hand shook. For a moment, murder danced in his eyes. Then Sheriff Watson, who'd been silent throughout, finally spoke. "Lower the weapon. Barnaby, no law's been broken here except what you're about to do." The pistol wavered, then dropped. Barnaby looked around at the faces, some still supporting him, but many turned away. His kingdom of fear cracked at the foundations. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You'll pay, all of you, when your crops fail, when your loans come due. When you need my help, remember this night." He mounted his horse, Wheeler and Slade following reluctantly. Others began to drift away, some ashamed, some thoughtful. The revolution was small, incomplete, but it was a start. As the last torches disappeared into the darkness, Evelyn found herself shaking. Rand's arm came around her, steady and warm. "Too old for love," he murmured, and there was gentle teasing in it now. "Getting younger by the minute," she admitted, and felt the truth of it in her bones. Not young again, that was gone forever, but renewed, chosen, free. The few who remained, Pete, Martha, Bradley, and others, nodded their respect before heading back to town. They'd face consequences come morning, but tonight they'd remembered what courage looked like. "You could have been killed," Martha said to Evelyn before leaving. "Was it worth it?" Evelyn looked at Ran, at the cabin that had become a haven, at the stars wheeling free above the mountains. "Ask me when I'm truly old," she said. "When I'm 90 and looking back, but tonight I'm exactly the right age to choose my life." Martha smiled, the expression taking decades off her weathered face. "About time one of us did." As silence settled over the mountain once more, Evelyn knew the fight wasn't over. Barnaby would scheme, the town would gossip, and the weight of propriety would press down like always. But tonight, she'd stood up and said no. Tonight, she'd chosen. And that, for a woman too old for love, was a very young thing indeed. The morning after the confrontation dawned cold and sharp, frost glittering on the cabin's rough-hewn logs. Evelyn stood at the window, watching the sun paint the peaks gold, when she heard them coming. Not a mob this time, but a deliberate procession of horses and heavy boots. Ran was already reaching for his rifle when they recognized Pete's distinctive whistle, the all-clear signal from their day's trading in town. The blacksmith appeared through the trees, but his face bore no good news. Behind him rode Sheriff Watson and, unexpectedly, Judge Carlton from the county seat. "Invited ourselves up for coffee," Pete said, but his forced cheer fooled no one. "Seems Barnaby rode through the night to file papers." "What kind of papers?" Evelyn asked, though her sinking heart already knew. Judge Carlton dismounted stiffly, a thin man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Mr. Keller has filed a formal claim of property theft and breach of contract. He's presented documents." "May we come in?" Sheriff Watson asked, apologetic. "This isn't a social call, but it needn't be unpleasant." Rand stepped aside, though his rifle remained close. They gathered around the rough table where only hours before Evelyn had felt safe. The judge produced a leather portfolio, spreading papers across the scarred wood. "These are loan documents signed by Samuel Hart," the judge began, adjusting his spectacles. "They detail a sum of $3,000 borrowed against all current and future assets of the Hart household." "Samuel was dying," Evelyn said quietly. "The medicine, the doctor from Denver. We tried everything." "The circumstances are unfortunate," Judge Carlton agreed. "But the law—" "Whose law?" Rand interrupted. "Show me where it says a widow becomes chattel." The judge looked uncomfortable. "It's not explicit, but precedent exists. In the case of Gardner versus Estate of McKinnon, the court ruled that when all assets are pledged and no assets remain, arrangements must be made for satisfaction of debt." "Arrangements?" Evelyn tasted bile. "You mean me?" "Mr. Keller has generously offered to forgive the debt upon marriage." The judge couldn't meet her eyes. "It's a substantial sum. More than the farm was worth. More than I'm worth," Evelyn finished. "So I should be grateful to be sold." "No one's selling anyone," Sheriff Watson said quickly. But even he looked doubtful. Pete leaned forward. "What if the debt was paid? Cash money? Then the matter would be resolved." The judge seemed relieved at the possibility. "But $3,000? I don't have it," Evelyn said. "Samuel knew that when he signed, we had nothing left but hope and each other. Mr. Keller claims you have assets hidden away. Jewelry, perhaps, or this." Evelyn pulled off her wedding ring, the thin gold band worn nearly through. "This is all I have of value, worth perhaps $5 to a trader." "Then I'm afraid I'll pay it." Everyone turned to stare at Rand. He stood steady, certain, like a man who'd made his decision long before this moment. $3,000? Pete whistled low. "Rand, that's—" "I know what it is." Rand moved to an old trunk in the corner, lifting out a hidden compartment. 20 years of trapping, trading, saving, never found much worth spending it on. He pulled out leather pouches, heavy with coin and dust. Gold gleamed dully in the morning light as he counted out stacks on the table. This is substantial," the judge said, clearly shocked. "But Mr. Keller specified the debt must be paid by Mrs. Hart or her appointed representative. Are you claiming to be—" "I'm claiming nothing." Ron looked directly at Evelyn. "This is a loan, interest-free, no conditions. What Mrs. Hart does with it is her choice." "I can't," Evelyn breathed. "It's everything you have." "No," he said simply. "It's just gold." Pete grinned suddenly. "Well then, seems like Mrs. Hart here has the means to pay her debt after all. Judge Carlton looked between them, understanding dawning. "If Mrs. Hart wishes to accept this loan and pay her debt, I see no legal impediment. But Barnaby will have his money," the judge said firmly. "That's all the law entitles him to." Evelyn stared at the gold, at Rand, at the hope she'd thought was dead. "Why?" she whispered. "Because everyone deserves choice," Rand said. "Sam knew that. Now you know it too." With shaking hands, Evelyn pushed the gold toward the judge. "Pay him, every cent, and get me a receipt that says paid in full, no further obligations." The judge nodded. Suddenly all business. "I'll need you to sign." "I'll sign my own name," Evelyn said fiercely. "Not as Mrs. Samuel Hart, not as anyone's property. Evelyn Hart, free woman." As she wrote her name with careful letters, something fundamental shifted. The pen scratched across paper like freedom itself being written into existence. "There's one more matter," Sheriff Watson said reluctantly. "Barnaby's demanded you return to town for the transfer. Says he wants it public, wants everyone to see. He wants to humiliate her. Pete growled. Let him try, Evelyn said, surprising them all with her calm. I'll come to town. I'll face him, but I go as myself, not as his property. An hour later, they rode down the mountain in procession. Evelyn had refused to change from her simple dress, refused to hide or hurry. She rode beside Ran, the weight of freedom making her sit straighter than she had in years. The town square was packed. Barnaby had made sure of that, spreading word that the runaway widow would be brought to heel. He stood on the bank steps like a king awaiting tribute, dressed in his finest suit, triumph written across his face. That triumph faltered when he saw her riding free, saw the judge's official manner, saw the leather pouches heavy with gold. What is this? Barnaby demanded. Payment in full, Judge Carlton announced, loud enough for all to hear. Mrs. Evelyn Hart has satisfied all debts incurred by her late husband, $3,000, as specified. Where did she? Barnaby's eyes snapped to Ran. You can't do this. The agreement was for marriage. The agreement, the judge interrupted, was for satisfaction of debt. Marriage was your preferred method, not a legal requirement. The debt is paid. With his money. She's nothing but a... Careful, Ran said softly, and something in his voice made Barnaby step back. The lady's paid her debt. Your business is concluded. Evelyn dismounted and walked up the steps until she stood eye to eye with Barnaby. The whole town watched, waiting. Count it, she said clearly. Every coin, every ounce of dust, count it all, and then write me a receipt. I want everyone here to witness. I owe you nothing. Barnaby's face went white, then red. You think you've won? You think this changes anything? You're still just a used-up widow, too old for you, Evelyn interrupted, and grateful for it. Laughter rippled through the crowd, quickly suppressed, but there. Barnaby heard it too, saw how the narrative was shifting. The powerful man brought low by a woman who chose freedom over security. Count the money, Judge Carlton ordered. Unless you're refusing legal payment? Trapped. Barnaby had no choice. He counted every coin while the town watched, his humiliation growing with each clink of gold. When it was done, when the receipt was signed and witnessed, Evelyn took the paper and held it high. Free and clear, she announced. Let everyone remember, I am no man's property, no man's debt. I am my own. And what will you do now? Barnaby snarled. Live in sin with that mountain savage? Pretend you're young enough to start over? Evelyn looked at Ran, who waited patient as stone, offering no pressure, no claim, just possibility. Then she looked at the crowd, some hostile, some thoughtful, some secretly envious of her courage. I'm going to live, she said simply, on my own terms, by my own choice. And if that offends you, Mr. Keller, perhaps you should examine why a free woman frightens you so much. She turned her back on him, the ultimate dismissal, and walked through the crowd. Some stepped aside quickly, others nodded respect. Martha Clearwater caught her hand briefly, squeezing tight. Young Bradley tipped his hat. Pete grinned wide as the mountains. At the edge of the square, Evelyn turned back one more time. Barnaby still stood on the bank steps, receipt crumpled in his fist, looking smaller than she'd ever seen him. I'm too old for love, she called out, and his face lit with vindication until she continued. Too old for the kind of love you offer, chains dressed up as protection, ownership masquerading as affection. But for real love, for chosen love, for love that sees me as a person, not property. She smiled, and it was sharp as winter wind. Turns out I'm exactly the right age for that. She mounted her horse and rode out of town, ran beside her, Pete and a few others following protectively. Behind them, Barnaby raged, but his power was broken. He'd gotten his gold, but lost something more valuable, the town's unquestioning obedience. As they climbed back toward the mountains, Evelyn felt the weight of 20 years lifting from her shoulders. She owed nothing to anyone now, except perhaps to Ran, though he'd never collect. That was well done. he said quietly. Sam would have been proud. It's not over. Barnaby will make trouble. Let him try. Rand's smile was sharp as hers had been. The mountains have ways of dealing with men like him. They rode in comfortable silence until the town disappeared behind the trees. Then Evelyn surprised them both by laughing, full and free. The sound of a woman who'd discovered she wasn't too old for anything that mattered. I'll pay you back, she said. Every penny. It might take years, but take forever. Rand suggested, I'm patient. And in those simple words, Evelyn heard what he wasn't saying, that he'd wait as long as she needed, that the debt between them was already paid in courage, witnessed, and freedom defended. That maybe, just maybe, she wasn't too old for love after all. The sun climbed higher, warming the mountain air, and Evelyn Hart, free woman, rode toward whatever came next with her head high and her heart, finally, unbound. A week passed in uneasy quiet. Evelyn had returned to Rand's cabin, but both knew this peace was temporary. Barnaby Keller didn't forgive humiliation, and the town waited to see what form his revenge would take. It came on a gray afternoon when Pete arrived, horse lathered with sweat, face grim. Town meeting tonight. Barnaby's called in every debt, every favor. He's got something planned. Let him plan, Rand said. But Evelyn saw the concern he tried to hide. No. She set down the shirt she'd been mending. I won't hide while others suffer for helping me. We're going. The sun was setting when they reached town, painting the sky the color of blood. The church was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls. Barnaby stood at the pulpit like a dark preacher, Judge Carlton beside him looking distinctly uncomfortable. Ah, the fugitive returns. Barnaby's smile was sharp as glass. How convenient. We were just discussing the town's future. They found space near the back, Martha Clearwater making room on her bench. The old woman's face was troubled. He's been talking for an hour. Debts, contracts, obligations. Got folks scared. Good people of Willow Creek. Barnaby continued. We face a crisis of law and order. When contracts can be broken, when debts can be avoided through trickery, when women can abandon their rightful places, what becomes of civilization? Murmurs ran through the crowd. Some nodded agreement. Others looked uncomfortable. I hold mortgages on half the farms in this valley. Barnaby produced a leather case, heavy with papers. Loans made in good faith, expecting good faith in return. But if we allow people to simply run away from their obligations, what security do any of us have? Get to the point. Keller, Pete called out. The point, Mr. Hensley, is that I'm calling in all debts, immediately, unless, he paused for effect, unless this town agrees to uphold proper law and order. Starting with the return of stolen property, I paid my debt. Evelyn stood, voice carrying clear. Every penny. You have no claim on me. Not you, Mrs. Hart, though your corruption of decent society is noted. Barnaby's eyes glittered. I speak of property stolen by your companion. 20 years ago. The crowd stirred, confused. Rand tensed beside her. Tell them, Mercer, Barnaby commanded. Tell them about the Fletcher family, about the daughter who disappeared, about the savage who stole her away. I stole no one. Rand's voice was steady, but Evelyn heard the pain underneath. No, then where is Grace Fletcher? Where is the woman you took into these mountains? An old man in the front row stood slowly. Josiah Fletcher, bent with age and grief. My daughter, he whispered. 22 years since she vanished. They said Indians took her, but there were rumors. I'll tell you what happened, Ron said, standing tall. Since Keller wants truth. He faced the crowd, unflinching. Grace Fletcher ran away, like Mrs. Hart here. She was being forced into marriage, sold to pay her father's gambling debts. Lies, Josiah protested, but weakly. She came to the mountains seeking freedom. I found her half frozen, dying, nursed her back to health. Rand's jaw tightened. We fell in love, married by a traveling preacher, all legal and proper. Then where is she? Barnaby demanded. Dead. The word fell like stone. Died giving birth 5 winters past. Buried on the mountain she loved, free till the end. The church erupted. Josiah Fletcher sank back into his seat. Some shouted accusations, others demanded proof. Through it all, Barnaby smiled. You see, he raised his voice over the chaos. This man stole a daughter from her family, denied a father his rights, just as he now tries to steal Mrs. Hart from her lawful obligations. I was no man's property. A clear voice rang out. Everyone turned as a young woman entered the church. Native features, but with Rand's gray eyes and strong jaw. Neither was my mother. Sarah. Rand's voice broke on the name. Forgive me, Pa. I know you wanted me safe in the northern settlements, but I heard what was happening. The young woman faced the crowd without fear. My mother left letters, many letters. Would you like to hear how Grace Fletcher really lived? This is irrelevant. Barnaby started, but Judge Carleton raised a hand. I'd like to hear them. If there's a question of law here, all evidence should be considered. Sarah produced a worn leather pouch, drawing out yellowed papers. My mother wrote to her sister back east. Never sent them, too dangerous, but she wanted someone to know her truth. She began to read, and Grace Fletcher's voice filled the church, telling of beatings that drove her to flee, of love found in unlikely places, of a life chosen rather than imposed. The words painted a picture far different from Barnaby's tale of theft and savagery. I am not stolen, Sarah read, but saved, not lost, but finally found. If freedom makes me savage, then I embrace it gladly. Forgeries, Barnaby snarled, but doubt rippled through the crowd. I remember, Grace. Martha Clearwater spoke up. Saw the bruises myself. Tried to help, but her father... She looked at Josiah with pity and condemnation. You sold her sure as if you'd put her on an auction block. The law, Josiah protested. There's God's law and man's law. Reverend Mills interrupted. Surprising everyone, the minister rarely spoke at town meetings. And then there's Barnaby Keller's law, which serves only Barnaby Keller. Careful, Reverend. Your church carries a mortgage too. Then foreclose. The minister stood straighter than he had in years. I'll not stand silent while you twist law and scripture to justify slavery. The word hung in the air like a curse. Slavery. That's what it was. Dressed in contracts and debts. This is about order, Barnaby insisted, but his control was slipping. About maintaining proper society. Your society, young Bradley called out. Where men like you own everything and everyone. Where women are traded like cattle and called blessed for it. Where love is less important than ledgers, another voice added. Where being too old means accepting whatever crumbs you throw, Evelyn said, stepping forward. I've heard that phrase my whole life. Too old to choose, too old to dream, too old to deserve better. Well, I'm done being too old for anything except your twisted version of order. Fine words, Barnaby sneered. But words don't pay debts. I hold the papers. I own the loans. Submit to proper authority or watch this town burn. Then let it burn. The voice came from the back. Samuel Hart's brother, Thomas, whom Evelyn hadn't seen since the funeral. He walked forward, favoring his bad leg from the war. My brother died trying to save his farm, taking loans from you that no honest man could repay. You bled him dry, then tried to take his widow as interest. Thomas faced Barnaby squarely. I've been to the county seat, talked to other towns. You're not the only law anymore. Keller. He produced documents of his own. Federal marshals are coming. Seems your creative bookkeeping has attracted attention. All those loans with impossible terms. All that property seized under questionable circumstances. Barnaby's face went white. You can't prove... Can't I? Thomas smiled grimly. Folks have been keeping records too. Every unfair contract, every forced marriage, every family destroyed. You taught us the power of paper. Keller. Now choke on it. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Some rallied to Barnaby's defense, but more stood against him. Years of quiet resentment boiled over. Stories poured out. Daughters married off to cover debts. farms seized on technicalities, lives destroyed by one man's greed disguised as law. Through it all, Sarah stood by her father's side, living proof that love could flourish outside Barnaby's narrow definitions. Her very existence refuted his worldview. "You think you've won?" Barnaby's composure finally cracked completely. "I'll burn it all down before I let you—" He reached inside his coat. Several men, including Ran and Pete, moved at once, but it was Evelyn who reached him first, her months of hard farm labor making her faster than expected. She grabbed his wrist as he pulled out a flask of kerosene and matches. "No more burning," she said firmly. "No more threats. You've lost, Barnaby, not to savagery or lawlessness, but to simple human decency." Sheriff Watson finally stirred himself to action, taking the flask and restraining Barnaby. "That's enough, Judge. I think we need those federal marshals sooner rather than later." As they led Barnaby away, he turned back one last time. "You're still too old," he spat at Evelyn. "Too old and used up for anything but love," Evelyn finished calmly. "Too old for anything but real love, freely given and freely received. You're right about that much." The church slowly emptied, people dispersing in small groups, talking intensely. The old order hadn't fallen completely. It never did in one night, but cracks had formed that would only widen. Sarah approached Evelyn shyly. "Thank you for standing up to him, for showing me that women can choose." "Your mother showed you that," Evelyn said gently. "I just followed her example." Outside, the stars were coming out. Ran stood apart, watching his daughter talk with Evelyn, something soft and wondering in his expression. "She's beautiful," Evelyn said, joining him. "You must be proud." "Her mother would be." He paused. "Grace would have liked you. Same spirit, same refusal to be caged." "I'm not Grace," Evelyn said carefully. "I'm older, more weathered." "You're you," Ran interrupted. "That's enough, more than enough." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the town reshape itself in small ways. Pete organizing a group to review all of Barnaby's contracts, Martha Clearwater taking Sarah under her wing, introducing her to the younger women, Thomas Hart shaking hands with Judge Carlton, planning legal reforms. "It's not over," Evelyn observed. "No," Ran agreed. "But it's a start. I meant what I said in there, about being too old for anything but love." She looked at him directly. "I'm not a young woman. Ran, I can't give you children, can't pretend years haven't marked me." "I'm not asking you to." His hand found hers, calloused and warm. "I've been waiting, remember? Not for some dream of youth, but for you, as you are." Evelyn felt the last walls inside her crumble. All her life, she'd been told she was too old for passion, for choice, for anything but gratitude and duty. But here was a man who'd waited decades for love, who'd given everything to secure her freedom, who looked at her and saw not a debt to be collected, but a person to be cherished. "I'm still learning," she warned. "Learning how to choose, how to be free, how to love without obligation. We'll learn together." Ran promised. Got all the time in the world. As they walked back toward the mountains, Sarah fell into step beside them. Behind them, the town continued its slow transformation. And ahead, the peaks stood eternal, offering not an escape from the world but a different way of being in it. Evelyn Hart, too old for false love but perfectly aged for the real thing, walked toward her chosen future with her head high and her heart, finally, unafraid. The fire started just after midnight, 3 days after the church meeting. Evelyn woke to the smell of smoke and Ran's urgent hand on her shoulder. "Get up, now!" Through the cabin window, an orange glow painted the sky above the tree line. Not the cabin, the town. Willow Creek was burning. They dressed quickly, Sarah already outside saddling horses. As they rode hard toward town, other mountain folk joined them, men and women who'd chosen the wilderness over Barnaby Keller's version of civilization, now racing to help those who'd finally stood against him. The scene in town was chaos. The bank burned brightest, flames licking toward the general store. Bucket brigades fought desperately. but the fire spread hungry as gossip. Through the smoke and shouting, Evelyn heard Barnaby's voice, wild with triumph. "You wanted to burn the old ways? Well, burn then! Burn it all!" He stood in the street, clothes singed, face manic with righteous fury. Sheriff Watson and 2 deputies tried to restrain him, but he fought like a man possessed. "My grandfather built this bank. My father built this town. If I can't have it, no one can." "The church!" someone screamed. "The church has families inside." Reverend Mills had opened the sanctuary to those whose homes were threatened. Now flames crept toward the wooden structure where children huddled with their mothers. Without thought, Evelyn ran toward the church. She heard Rand shout her name but didn't stop. Too many years of being told she was too old, too weak, too worn to help. She was done believing it. The smoke inside was thick, choking. She found Mrs. Pemberton trying to shepherd a group of children toward the door, but the woman was overwhelmed. Coughing, near collapse. "Take my hand," Evelyn ordered, grabbing the nearest child. "Form a chain. Don't let go." She led them out. One trip, then another. Her lungs burned. Her eyes streamed, but she kept moving. On the 3rd trip, she found young Bradley trying to move a beam that had fallen across the back exit, trapping more families. "Together," she gasped. They heaved, joined by others. Sarah, strong as her father. Martha Clearwater, aged but fierce. Even Mrs. Pemberton, finding courage in crisis. The beam shifted just enough. People poured out, but Evelyn heard crying from the choir loft. A child, forgotten in the panic. The stairs were aflame. Without hesitating, she grabbed a baptismal banner, soaked it in the font, and wrapped it around herself. "Evelyn, no!" Ran appeared through the smoke, but she was already climbing. The child, little Mary Watson, the sheriff's daughter, huddled in the corner, too terrified to move. Evelyn gathered her up, feeling the floor groan ominously beneath them. "Close your eyes, sweetheart. We're going flying." She couldn't take the stairs. Instead, she went to the window, kicking out the glass. Below, townsfolk spread out a wagon canvas. Such a long drop. Too far for an old woman. Too dangerous for someone her age. She jumped. The impact knocked the breath from her, but hands caught them, pulled them to safety. Mary clung to her, sobbing but alive. Around them, the firefighting continued, but the church was saved. Most of the town was saved, though Barnaby's bank was nothing but ember and ash. "You fool woman," Rand said roughly, checking her for injuries. "You beautiful, brave fool. Too old to be jumping from windows," she agreed, then winced. "Think I proved that point." But others had seen. Others had watched the woman Barnaby called worthless risk everything for their children. Sheriff Watson knelt beside them, tears cutting tracks through the soot on his face. "My Mary. You saved my Mary." He looked around at the crowd gathering. "She saved my daughter. This woman Barnaby said was too old, too used up. She saved my little girl." The story spread faster than the flames had. Evelyn Hart, the runaway widow, the woman who defied Barnaby Keller, had run into fire for their children, had organized the evacuation, had jumped from a window with a child in her arms. "Where is Barnaby?" Judge Carlton demanded, finally arriving from the county seat with the federal marshals Thomas Hart had promised. They found him trying to flee on horseback, saddlebags heavy with what he'd salvaged from the bank vault. The marshals arrested him for arson, destruction of property, and attempted murder. The fire had been no accident but carefully set, intended to destroy evidence of his crimes while punishing the town for its defiance. As dawn broke over the damaged but surviving town, people gathered in the square. Some buildings were lost, but no lives. The old order had literally burned, and from its ashes, something new could grow. Pete stood on the bank's ruined steps. "We need to rebuild, not just buildings, everything. New bank, new laws, new ways." "Who'll run things?" someone asked. "Without Barnaby." "We will," Martha Clearwater said firmly. "All of us, together. No more one man holding all the power." "And we need a new mayor," Reverend Mills added. "Someone who understands what this town needs to become." Eyes turned to Evelyn, still soot-stained and singed, still holding little Mary Watson. "Don't be ridiculous," she said automatically. "I'm the woman who saved our children," Sheriff Watson interrupted. "Who stood up to tyranny, who showed us what courage looks like. I'm too old." "Stop!" Sarah stepped forward. Grace Fletcher's daughter, raised free in the mountains. "Stop saying that. My mother was told she was too young, too weak, too female to choose her life. You're told you're too old, too worn, too whatever. When do we stop believing their lies?" The crowd murmured agreement. These people who'd watched her humiliated, who'd whispered about the runaway widow, now looked at her with something approaching awe. "I don't know anything about being mayor," Evelyn protested. "You know about work," Pete said. "About survival. About choosing freedom over security. That's what we need now." "Think about it," Judge Carlton suggested. "The federal government is very interested in towns that reject corruption, that embrace new ways. There would be support, resources." Evelyn looked at Ran, who smiled slightly. "Your choice," he said simply. "Always your choice." She thought about the months since Samuel's death, the pressure to remarry, the assumption she was too old for anything but quiet submission, the fight for freedom that had brought her here, to this moment, covered in soot and ash but still standing. "I'm not too old to learn," she said finally. "If you'll have me, if you'll help me, we can try to build something better." The cheer that went up could have been heard in the mountains. It wasn't unanimous. Some still clung to the old ways, muttering about proper places and natural order. But change had come to Willow Creek, written in fire and courage. The rebuilding began immediately. The new bank would be owned collectively. No single man able to hold the town's finances hostage. The laws would be rewritten, ensuring no one could be forced into marriage for debt. The school would accept all children, including Sarah and others of mixed heritage. Barnaby Keller was taken away in chains, raving about order and ownership and the downfall of civilization. His empire of debt and fear collapsed overnight, revealed as the hollow thing it had always been. That evening, as the sun set over the changed town, Evelyn stood with Ran overlooking the damage and the beginning of renewal. Her ribs hurt from the jump. Her lungs still felt scorched, but her heart was light. "From runaway bride to mayor," Ran mused. "That's quite a journey. I'm not mayor yet. They might come to their senses." "They won't." He wrapped an arm around her carefully, mindful of her bruises. "They've seen who you really are now. Not too old, just seasoned. Like good timber that's weathered storms and come out stronger." "Samuel would laugh," she said softly. "His proper wife, running a town, standing on the bank steps giving speeches. Samuel would be proud. He saw who you were even when you couldn't." Ran turned her to face him. "The question now is what you see," Evelyn considered. In the church window's reflection, she'd glimpsed herself just before jumping, face set with determination, arms strong around a child. No thought for age or propriety or what others might think. Just a woman doing what needed doing. "I see someone who isn't finished yet," she said. "Someone who has work to do, choices to make, life to live. Someone who might even have room for love, if it's the patient kind." "I've waited this long," Ran said. "What's a little more time?" They stood together as the stars came out over Willow Creek. No longer Barnaby Keller's town, but their town, all of theirs, messy and imperfect but free. Tomorrow would bring challenges. There would be those who resented the change, who mourned the old ways, who thought women, especially women of a certain age, should know their place. But tonight, Evelyn Hart stood tall despite her singed dress and aching ribs, no longer running from others' expectations but toward her own chosen future. The fire that had threatened to destroy had instead cleared ground for new growth, and she, too old for so many things according to the world's measure, had discovered she was exactly the right age for courage, for change, for the kind of love that waited patiently while she learned to choose herself. The mountains watched, eternal and patient, as the town below began its transformation. And somewhere in the ashes of the old bank, the papers that had bound Evelyn in debt crumbled to nothing, as insubstantial as the lies that had once told her she was too old for anything that mattered. The trial drew crowds from 3 counties. Federal marshals had to post guards around the courthouse as people gathered to witness Barnaby Keller's judgment. 6 weeks had passed since the fire, and Willow Creek showed both scars and signs of rebirth. New buildings rising from ashes, fresh paint on old structures, and something harder to define: hope. Evelyn sat in the front row, no longer the fleeing bride, but the town's interim mayor, wearing a simple gray dress that Martha Clearwater had sewn for her. Beside her sat Ran, silent support, while Sarah took notes for the territorial newspaper that had sent reporters to cover the spectacle. Barnaby entered in chains, but his arrogance remained intact. His lawyers, 3 of them from Denver, flanked him like guards. Even facing federal charges, he carried himself like a man who expected to buy his way free. "The defense calls Josiah Fletcher," Barnaby's lead attorney announced. The old man shuffled to the stand, looking decades older than his years. Under questioning, he painted a picture that made Evelyn's stomach turn: his daughter Grace as property stolen, Ran as the savage who'd taken her, the natural order disrupted. "And now," Josiah's voice cracked with rehearsed emotion, "that same man corrupts another woman, encourages rebellion, destroys the peace, Meister. Keller worked so hard to maintain." "Objection," the federal prosecutor said calmly. "The witness is giving opinion, not testimony." As the legal dance continued, Evelyn felt the weight of watching eyes. Half the town still wondered if she'd overreached, if a woman her age should be leading them. The other half waited to see if she'd hold firm against this last assault on the new order they were building. "The defense calls Evelyn Hart." She'd expected this, but her pulse still quickened as she took the stand. Barnaby's lawyer smiled like a snake. "Mrs. Hart, or should I say, Miss Mayer, quite a rise for a widow who was running away in her undergarments just weeks ago." "I was running from forced marriage," Evelyn replied steadily. "As is my right." "Your right? Tell me, what gives you the right to incite rebellion, to encourage others to break lawful contracts, the same thing that gives any person the right to refuse slavery?" Gasps ran through the courtroom. The lawyer's smile sharpened. "Slavery? Dramatic words for a simple business arrangement. Mr. Keller offered to pay your husband's debts in exchange for marriage. Many women would be grateful. Grateful to be sold?" Evelyn's voice rose. "Grateful to be treated as property to be transferred between men. At your age, what else did you expect?" There it was, the weapon they always used. Evelyn felt the familiar sting, but also something new. Anger, clean as fire. "I expected to be treated as a human being with the right to choose my own life. Age doesn't diminish that right. But it diminishes other things, doesn't it? Beauty, fertility, value." "Objection." The prosecutor stood. "Counsel is badgering the witness." "I'll answer." Evelyn said firmly, "Yes, age changes things. It's taken my smooth skin, my ability to bear children, my naive belief that the world is fair, but it's given me things too. Strength to stand up to bullies, wisdom to see through lies, and courage to help build something better than a town ruled by one man's greed." Pretty words, but let's discuss facts. You accepted assistance from Ransom Mercer to pay your debts. What was the nature of that arrangement? The insinuation hung ugly in the air. Evelyn felt Rand tense behind her, but kept her eyes on the lawyer. "He loaned me money with no conditions. Unlike Mr. Keller, he understands that women are people, not possessions to be purchased." "And you're now living with this man?" "I'm living in my own home, rebuilt with my own hands and the help of neighbors. Mr. Mercer lives in his cabin. We're friends, nothing more." "Friends?" The lawyer's tone dripped skepticism. "A widow and a mountain man? How modern? Tell me, do you think you're setting a proper example for the young women of Willow Creek?" "I hope so. I hope they see that they have choices beyond accepting whatever man decides to claim them." That being too old or too poor or too anything doesn't mean they must accept abuse. No one abused you, Mrs. Hart. No? Evelyn's voice carried to every corner of the room. Being told I had no choice wasn't abuse. Being hunted with dogs wasn't abuse. Having my worth measured only by my ability to serve a man's needs, that's not abuse. She stood in the witness box, no longer the cowed widow who'd fled in terror. Barnaby Keller burned down half this town because we dared say no to him. He destroyed property, endangered lives, traumatized children, all because he couldn't accept that one woman, one too old woman, refused to be his property. If that's not abuse, what is? The courtroom erupted. Judge Carlton gavelled for order while Barnaby's face flushed purple. When quiet returned, the prosecutor stood. I'd like to call my final witness, Sarah Mercer. Sarah took the stand with her mother's letters. As she read Grace Fletcher's words aloud, the courtroom fell silent. The dead woman's voice filled the space, telling of beatings, of being sold to pay gambling debts, of finding freedom and love in the mountains. I know they call me stolen, Sarah read, her voice steady. But I was not taken. I escaped. I was not corrupted. I was freed. And if choosing love over obligation makes me fallen, then I embrace the fall gladly. Josiah Fletcher began to weep, the sound raw and terrible. His careful testimony crumbled as he heard his daughter's truth. My final entry, Sarah continued, is for my daughter. Should I not survive her birth, know that you were conceived in love, born in freedom. Never let anyone tell you that you're too anything, too mixed, too wild, too much yourself. Your father waited 20 years to find real love. I risked everything to choose it. You are the proof that the wait and risk were worthwhile? When she finished, the silence was complete. Even Barnaby's lawyers seemed subdued. The federal prosecutor stood for closing arguments. This case isn't about contracts or debts. It's about whether we'll be a territory, soon to be a state, that treats women as property or as people. Whether we'll allow men like Barnaby Keller to rule through fear and manipulation. Whether we'll punish those who dare to say no. He gestured to Evelyn. Mrs. Hart has been called too old, too rebellious, too unwomanly. But I see a citizen who refused to accept injustice, who helped save lives during the fire, who now works to rebuild this town on principles of equality and freedom. If that's what being too old means, perhaps we need more such women. The defense's closing was passionate but hollow, trying to paint Barnaby as a victim of changing times, a man whose old-fashioned values were under assault. But the evidence was too strong. The arson, the threats, the systematic abuse of power. When the verdict came, it surprised no one. Guilty on all charges. 20 years in federal prison. As the marshals led Barnaby away, he turned one last time. You think you've won? You're still just an old woman playing at power. When reality sets in, when you fail, then I'll fail as myself, Evelyn interrupted. Not as your property. The courtroom emptied slowly, people discussing what they'd witnessed. On the courthouse steps, townsfolk gathered around Evelyn, some who'd opposed her now offering tentative support, others emboldened by the federal backing of their new ways. Speech, someone called. Mayor Hart, give us a speech. Evelyn looked at the expectant faces, men and women, old and young, those who'd always supported her and those just beginning to question the old order. I'm not much for speeches, she began, and laughter rippled through the crowd. 6 months ago, I was told I was too old for love, too worn for worth, too far past my prime to matter. I believed it. Many of us believed the lies about what we were too much or too little of. She found Rand's eyes in the crowd, drew strength from his steady presence. But being too old freed me. When you've got nothing left to lose, no youth to preserve, no beauty to protect, no illusions about fairness, you can finally see clearly. And what I see is a town ready to build something new. Not perfect, but honest. Not easy, but chosen. What about those who say a woman shouldn't lead? Someone called out. Not hostile, just uncertain. Then let them say it, Evelyn replied. Let them say I'm too old, too female, too damaged by life to lead. And then let them watch as we prove them wrong, not by becoming what they want, but by succeeding as ourselves. Sheriff Watson stepped forward. I was one who doubted, thought the natural order was natural for a reason. Then this woman saved my Mary from flames while I stood frozen. His voice broke. If that's unnatural, I'll take it over natural any day. Others spoke. Pete about economic plans, Martha about the new school, Reverend Mills about churches that welcomed rather than judged. The future they painted wasn't utopian, but possible, built on the radical notion that people deserved choices. As the crowd finally dispersed, Ran approached. Fine words. Samuel would have been proud. I was thinking of Grace too. Evelyn admitted. Her letters, her courage. She was so young when she chose freedom. And you were so old when you chose it. Sarah added, joining them. Maybe that's the point. There's no right age for courage. No expiration date on deserving better. They walked together through the rebuilding town, where the bank had stood. A cooperative was rising. The new charter posted on the courthouse wall enshrined principles that would have horrified Barnaby Keller. Women's property rights, protection against forced marriage, limits on debt collection. I need to tell you both something, Evelyn said as they reached the edge of town. The federal prosecutors offered me something, a permanent appointment as mayor, with territorial backing, real authority to make changes. That's wonderful, Sarah exclaimed, but noticed Evelyn's hesitation. Isn't it? It means staying in town, being visible, political. It means... She looked at Ran. It means choosing this over other possibilities. Ran was quiet for a long moment. Then, I've waited this long for you to be free to choose. I'm not going to start putting conditions on it now. But you hate town life. I hate towns that crush people. This town, the one you're building, that's different. He smiled slightly. Besides, someone needs to make sure the new cooperative doesn't fall into old patterns. Might be I could help with that. You'd leave the mountains? For me? I'd share them with you. Town business by day, mountain cabin when you need peace. Best of both worlds. If you're willing. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. Not of sadness, but of possibility. I'm too old to believe in fairy tale endings. Good, Ron said firmly. Because this isn't an ending. It's a beginning, messy and complicated and real. The question is, do you want it? She thought of the journey that had brought her here, from desperate flight to tentative freedom to unexpected leadership. Every step had been told she was too old, too late, too far gone for new chapters. Every step had proved those voices wrong. I want all of it, she said, surprising herself with a fierce certainty. The town, the challenges, the chance to build something better, and... She met his eyes fully. And you, if you're still offering, not as payment for anything, not from gratitude, but because I choose it. Choose you. Sarah clapped delightedly. Mother would dance. Oh, she would laugh to see the woman who was too old for love, choosing it freely. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of hope, Evelyn Hart stood between two worlds, the town she was helping to rebuild and the mountains that promised peace. She didn't have to choose between them. Like everything else now, she could have both on her own terms. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be those who resented change, who mourned Barnaby's fall, who thought the natural order had been disrupted. But tonight, surrounded by chosen family and nascent dreams, Evelyn knew the truth. She wasn't too old for any of this. She was exactly the right age for all of it. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold. Frost painting the windows of Evelyn's small house like nature's own celebration. 6 months had passed since Barnaby Keller's trial. 6 months of building and growing and slowly learning to believe in the permanence of freedom. Hold still, Martha Clearwater chided, adjusting the collar of Evelyn's dress. Not white this time, but deep blue like the mountain sky. You're jumpier than a cat in a thunderstorm. I'm too old to be a nervous bride. Evelyn laughed, but her hands trembled slightly. Nonsense. You're exactly the right age to know what you're choosing. Martha's eyes misted. 40 years I've watched women marry for every reason except love. Today, I watch one marry for no reason but... Through the window, Evelyn could see the town square filling with people. The rebuilt church stood proud, its doors open to all. Pete had crafted new pews from salvaged timber. Sarah had woven mountain flowers into garlands. Even Mrs. Pemberton, much subdued since the trial, had contributed her best tablecloth for the reception. "The whole town's coming," Sarah announced, bursting in with an armload of winter roses. "Even folks from the county seat. They want to see the mayor who tamed Willow Creek marry the mountain man who helped her do it." "We tamed nothing," Evelyn corrected gently. "We just gave it room to grow wild in better ways." A knock at the door made them all turn. Thomas Hart entered, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best but determined. "Came to ask if you'd like an escort," he said gruffly. "No, I'm just your brother-in-law, not blood kin, but Samuel would have wanted... well, he would have wanted to see you happy. Reckon I can stand in his stead, if you'll have me." Evelyn felt tears threaten. "He knew, didn't he? Samuel knew I was dying inside, trying to be what everyone expected. He knew why he made provisions, asked Rand to watch over you, said you were too good for the life this town would give you unless you fought for different." "Then yes," Evelyn said softly. "Yes, I'd be honored to have you walk with me." The procession to the church was unlike any Willow Creek had seen. No rushed escape this time. No fear dogging her heels. Evelyn walked proud and steady, choosing each step. Children threw dried flowers, a new tradition Sarah had suggested, replacing the old custom of throwing grain to ensure fertility. "Let them throw flowers for beauty," Sarah had said firmly. "For joy, for choices freely made." The church was packed, every seat full and people standing along the walls. But Evelyn saw only Ran, waiting at the altar in his best buckskins and a new shirt she'd sewn herself. His gray eyes held the same steady patience they'd shown that first day in the forest, but now mixed with something deeper. Joy, perhaps, or wonder. Reverend Mills beamed as they approached. "Dearly beloved, we gather today not to witness a transaction or settle a debt, but to celebrate a choice. Two people, neither young nor naive, choosing to bind their lives together not from necessity, but from love." "Some called her too old," the Reverend continued, his voice carrying to every corner. "Some called him too wild, but God's time isn't man's time, and love's season comes when hearts are ready, not when the world approves." When it came time for vows, Ran spoke first, his mountain-rough voice gentle. "Evelyn Hart, you say you're too old for fairy tales, so I won't promise you one. I promise real things, warm fires on cold nights, strong hands when yours are weary, patience when the town work keeps you late. I promise to see you not as you were or as others say you should be, but as you are, fierce and free, and choosing me not from debt, but from desire. I've been waiting for you, and I'd wait longer still if needed, but I'm grateful beyond words that the waiting's done." Evelyn had to swallow twice before she could speak. "Ransom Mercer, you gave me choice when I had none, freedom when I was chained, hope when I was too old for hoping. I can't promise to be an easy wife. I have a town to run, battles to fight, a whole life to live that I'm just beginning at 35, but I promise to choose you every day, not from gratitude or obligation, but because you see me whole and find me worthy as I am. You say you've been waiting for me, but truth is, I've been waiting too, waiting to become who I needed to be to meet you as an equal." "The rings?" Reverend Mills asked. Sarah stepped forward with two simple bands. Nothing fancy, just mountain gold hammered smooth. As Ran slipped hers on, Evelyn noticed an inscription inside, "Never too old for love." "By the power vested in me by God and the territory of Colorado," Reverend Mills proclaimed, "I pronounce you husband and wife, bound by choice, blessed by courage, and proof to all that love's timing is perfect, no matter what age it arrives." The kiss was tender, brief, but in it was promise of longer kisses to come, of time to explore this love they'd chosen with eyes wide open. The celebration spilled out of the church into the square. Tables groaned under food contributed by the whole town, not the sparse, grudging fare of obligatory gatherings, but abundance born of genuine joy. Even those who doubted Evelyn's leadership, who'd muttered about proper places and natural order, couldn't help but be moved by the happiness radiating from the couple. "Speech!" Pete called out, grinning. "What's a town gathering without Mayor Hart making a speech?" "Mayor Mercer now," someone corrected. But Evelyn shook her head. "Still Hart. A name my first husband gave me with love, that I'll keep with love. Ran understands. We're building new traditions here, not just following old ones." She stood, raising her cup of cider. 6 months ago, I ran from this town in terror, believing I was too old for anything but surrender. Today, I stand here as your mayor, as a wife by choice, not compulsion, as proof that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. Cheers rang out, but she wasn't finished. This town has been reborn. We've thrown off the chains of one man's greed, built new ways based on choice and dignity. We've said that women aren't property, that age doesn't diminish worth, that love matters more than ledgers, and we've only just begun. She found faces in the crowd. Mrs. Pemberton, who now taught at the school alongside her husband, Sheriff Watson, whose daughter Mary wore flowers in her hair and smiled without fear. Young couples who'd married for love now that forced marriages were banned. Older women who walked with heads higher, knowing their worth wasn't measured in youth alone. But the most important lesson, Evelyn continued, is this. There's no such thing as too old for new beginnings. Too old for fairy tales. Maybe those are for the young who still believe in perfection. But for real love, messy love, chosen love, for building something better from the ashes of what was. For that, we're exactly the right age, every one of us. As applause filled the square, Rand stood beside her, solid and sure. "Fine speech, Mrs. Mayor. Your first husband would be proud." "Both my husbands," she corrected softly. "One who loved me enough to ensure my freedom, and one who loved me enough to wait for me to claim it." The sun climbed higher, warming the winter air. Musicians struck up a reel, and dancing began. Another new tradition, allowing men and women to choose their partners rather than following strict social rules. "Will you dance with your wife, Mr. Mercer?" Evelyn asked, suddenly shy. "I'll dance with you until the mountains fall," he replied, leading her into the music. They danced as the town celebrated around them, this place that had transformed from Barnaby Keller's kingdom of fear into something freer, if more uncertain. Not perfect, perfection was another fairy tale, but genuine, built on the radical notion that people deserve choices. "No regrets?" Ran asked as they swayed together. "Only one," Evelyn admitted. "That I believed for so long that I was too old for this, all those years thinking my time had passed, that I should be grateful for scraps. But you learned better. We all did. That's the miracle. Not just my story, but all of ours. A whole town learning that too old and too late are lies told to keep us in line." As the celebration continued around them, Sarah approached with her journal. "I'm writing all this down," she announced. "Mother's story, your story, the town's story. So our daughters and granddaughters know there's no expiration date on courage, no age limit on love." "What will you call it?" Evelyn asked. Sarah smiled, her mother's spirit shining through. "Tales from Willow Creek, how being too old set us free." The sun arced across the sky, marking the hours in light and shadow. By evening, when the celebration finally wound down, Ran and Evelyn stood at the edge of town, looking up at the mountains that had sheltered their love. "Ready to go home?" Ran asked. They'd built a new cabin halfway between town and wilderness, close enough for her mayoral duties, but far enough to breathe free. "I've been ready my whole life," Evelyn replied. "Just took me 35 years to figure it out." They walked hand in hand up the mountain path, leaving the transformed town behind, not abandoning it. Evelyn would be back tomorrow, ready to continue the work of building something better. But tonight was theirs. This man who'd waited and this woman who'd finally stopped believing she was too old for joy. as stars emerged in the darkening sky. Evelyn Hart Mercer looked back once at Willow Creek, glowing warm in the valley. From runaway bride to mayor, from property to person, from too old for love to choosing it freely, the journey had been longer than the miles would suggest. But she'd made it. They'd all made it, in their various ways. And tomorrow, when challenges came, as they surely would, she'd face them as herself. A woman who'd learned that being too old for fairy tales meant being exactly the right age for truth. Ran squeezed her hand. "What are you thinking?" "That you were right," she said simply. "You've been waiting for me. But more than that, I've been waiting for me too. And now, finally, we're both here." They climbed higher, toward their new home, toward their chosen life, behind them. Willow Creek settled into evening, forever changed by a woman who'd refused to be too old for anything that mattered. And in the years to come, when young women despaired of their chances or older ones mourned their lost youth, townspeople would tell the tale of Evelyn Hart, the woman who ran from her wedding and found her life, who discovered that being too old for love was the biggest lie ever told. The mountains kept their secrets, but this one they shared gladly. Love comes when hearts are ready, not when the world approves. And readiness has nothing to do with age and everything to do with courage. "I've been waiting for you," the mountain man had said, and finally, gloriously, she'd arrived. Not too late, not too old, but perfectly on time. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining us on this journey through the Wild West, where love finds a way despite all obstacles. If you enjoyed Evelyn and Rand's story, we'd love to hear from you. Please share in the comments where you're listening from, whether you're in the mountains, the valleys, or somewhere in between. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel From Wild West and share your thoughts about this tale of courage, choice, and love that knows no age. What did this story mean to you? We're eager to hear your reflections and connect with fellow listeners who believe it's never too late for new beginnings.